I'm Kim Bridgford, and I'm very excited to be here to read some of my poetry for you today. The first few poems I'm going to read involve a trip that I took to Iceland with a photographer, Joe Yarrington. We're doing a project on Iceland, Venezuela, and Bhutan. The first poem I'm going to read, Margaret's Saga, is about the notion of the muse, and if you are a woman, who is your muse? Margaret's Saga. The strip of parchment on a woman's thigh in childbirth held a potent birthing spell to stave the pain and ease the baby's way. The midwife knew just what was possible. But then outside the hands of women's space, men took this scene and shaped an artifice. They used the muse as figure to inspire, then took the words and relocated power. Who is my muse? A woman asks herself. The midwife, hands in blood and words to heal, instead of words with swords that sought to steal, to put a different history on the shelf. There were no men inside this birthing scene. How could they write? How could they learn to mean? All over Iceland, there are these natural jacuzzis called hot pots. And one thing that I thought of as I was sitting in a hot pot on my journey was, would Ophelia's situation have been different if she had found a hot pot? Hot pot. A natural jacuzzi heated by the earth. The hot pot makes you realize the line you're sitting in, half evening air, half birth, transition state in which you half recline, half hold aware that in this heated water you are remade, half lava and half daughter, the steam rising in a metamorphosis of who you were before this birthing's kiss. This place is not where drowning starts to call, but where your inhibitions start to fall. The hot pot is seduction, finds the place between the body's heat, your upturned face reveals the split horizon of the air. Ophelia would have lived if she'd been there. One other sight that caught my attention was a series of fish that were along stones and that were so startling because there were so many of them. And were they fish? Were they symbol? What were they at all? And I tried to give that a religious cast. Fish drying on stones. They might as well be something else, for fish is not what comes to mind, more like a wish for birds that wakes a young philosopher, or angels lying down to soak the air. But fish is what they are, their ribs displayed like those of a skinny girl in a parade. There must be 60 of them placed on stones that buoy them up to dry along their bones. Squint and they seem like light that's breaking up. Kneel and they seem like Christ who's waking up. His arms still out, but lying by the sea and conscious of his own mortality. I'll remember this forever, he will swear. Then he'll turn and see the others lying there. I have often been intrigued by the religious story of Mary, Joseph, God, and Jesus. And in this religious poem that I'm going to read next, I explore that dynamic, and I also get into what I find very fascinating about Jesus among so many other things, and that is what I see as his place as a poet. Offerings. Mary. What does God's sex feel like? Is it the thrill of looking at the sun, or the slow tremor that shakes the body like a miracle? Is it the arrow piercing through the armor? Or is it nothing but the feeling that something new is just about to happen, a flower unfurling, the shaping of a thought, the idea of an apple made to ripen? The impossible for you was like a cup you drank from, and you in turn believed that when you suffered you were lifted up, and when you trusted you were also loved. Like any mother, you were filled with hope, the world now just the husk where he arrived. Joseph. You loved her, and it didn't matter what the others said. You knew what she'd been through, and if the story strained, you said, "Tell it again." And she did, until she saw the world in you. That kind of love is called a miracle. At night you curled into each other's hips, but sometimes you would think how she would call the sunrise God, the dazzle made of shapes that otherwise would merely hold a space. So what? You'd be the shadow to that sun. You'd be the father to her quickened child. If on the changing sky she saw his face, you thought that she'd forget. Our child is the one, our, she said our, and you were reconciled. Jesus. It's the only family that I ever knew, and I loved them. Yet poets always know they're born to live another kind of life, the hyperbolic dailiness of grief. I looked, I saw the homeless and the sick. I listened to the ordinary music of prayer, of wind like breath along the sand, and in them felt both oracle and end. And when he spoke to me, I called him Father. He was my muse, this iridescent other. His knowledge rubbed like oil against my skin. He opened up my spirit like the weather, and when I spoke, we made the poems together. He said I'd live forever till I'd listen. God. I am so perfect, sitting in the skies, to prove that I would gladly sacrifice through blood, who am immortal and alive. I'll offer up my son. That way I'll grieve the way that humans understand, to lose what matters most, the thing they'd never choose. I'll choose it. I am perfect, being God. My son is the embodiment of good. I will not hold him yet. He'll have a woman on the earth to raise him into what is human. And later he will meet me on a cloud and tell me what it was to be allowed to walk upon the earth with bitterness and know the thorns that I could only guess. Thank you so much.